I never thought I'd find myself standing at the center of two battles at once. One in the halls of the hospital where lives hung in the balance, and the other in my own heart, where I tried to fight feelings I knew I shouldn't have. The night shift had already been brutal. Alarms screamed, call lights flashed, and the ICU felt like a war zone more than a place of healing. I was running from room to room, answering pages, catching breathless glances in the stainless steel of the supply cabinet doors. And then there he was, Dr. Marcus Hale. Tall, commanding, calm in the chaos, and yet with this fire behind his eyes that told me he felt everything more deeply than he let on. At first, he frustrated me. He was quick with orders, sharp with his words, and he had this way of making me feel like I was being tested, even when I knew I was doing everything right. But there was also a pull. Every time he walked into the unit, the air changed. My pulse raced, and my mind fought to stay steady, professional, untouchable. That night, we had a trauma patient. A young man pulled from a wreck, his chest caved in, lungs collapsing. I was at the bedside with Marcus across from me. Our hands moved in sync, one step ahead of each other. He barked orders, I anticipated them, and the rhythm was so smooth it felt almost choreographed. But then his eyes met mine, just for a split second, and I felt the heat of it. The room faded. It was insane. How can you feel attraction in the middle of blood and broken bones? But I did. When the patient stabilized and the room cleared, Marcus didn't walk away immediately. He lingered, gloves still stained, watching me as I charted. "You move fast," he said, his voice lower now, less commanding, more curious. I shrugged, keeping my focus on the screen. "I've been doing this long enough." "You've been doing this well enough," he corrected. Then softer. "I like that." It was nothing, just a line, but it landed harder than it should have. I didn't look up. I couldn't. Because if I did, I wasn't sure what he would see in my eyes. Over the next few weeks, the tension between us only grew. We'd argue over little things. Medication timing, care plans, even who got to deliver updates to families. And yet, beneath the heat of those arguments, something else simmered. It wasn't just anger. It was electricity, dangerous and undeniable. One evening, after a particularly brutal double code where we lost both patients despite everything we tried, I found him alone in the staff lounge, staring into a cup of black coffee gone cold. His shoulders were slumped, his tie loosened, and for once the confident doctor looked simply human. I slipped in quietly, meaning only to grab water, but he looked up. His eyes were red, not from fatigue, but from something heavier. "You ever wonder if we're doing enough?" he asked suddenly, his voice rough. "All the time," I admitted, sitting across from him. "But if we didn't try, if we didn't fight for them, who would?" He studied me for a long moment, and then he said, "That's why I notice you. You don't just do the job, you fight for them." That night, the wall between us cracked. Not completely, but enough that I could see there was more to Marcus than the sharp edges he showed on the floor. Days blurred into nights. We worked side by side through traumas, strokes, cardiac arrests. And the more I saw of him, the more I wanted to know the man behind the title. He was brilliant, no question. But there were moments when his hand lingered just a second too long near mine when we passed instruments, or when his gaze dropped to my lips before he forced it back to the chart. I wasn't imagining it. He felt it too. The night everything changed, it wasn't a patient who drew us together. It was the silence after the storm. A mass casualty had flooded our hospital after a highway pileup. We'd worked until our legs shook, until my scrubs were stiff with sweat and blood. When the chaos finally broke and the halls fell quiet, I found myself outside by the ambulance bay, leaning against the wall, my chest heaving. Marcus walked out a few minutes later, his white coat gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked at me with something raw in his expression, something stripped of all defenses. Without a word, he came closer. I thought he was going to say something clinical, something about shift reports or follow-ups. Instead, he said, "I don't know how much longer I can fight this." My stomach flipped. Fight what? You. His voice cracked, just slightly. The way I feel when I'm around you. The air left my lungs. I should have walked away. I should have reminded him of boundaries, professionalism, the unspoken rules. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Then stop fighting." The kiss that followed was fire and release, months of tension igniting in one reckless, unforgettable moment. His hands framed my face like he was afraid I'd disappear. My fingers clutched his shirt like I needed him to hold me up. And when we finally pulled apart, we both knew there was no going back. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was the weight he was carrying outside these walls. It came out weeks later, after we'd begun to steal moments together. Whispers in stairwells, brushes of fingers under tables during chart reviews, long looks that spoke louder than words. We were balancing on the edge of something dangerous, but neither of us wanted to step back. Then one evening, I followed him after his shift. I don't know why. I think part of me just wanted to see him beyond the hospital. He drove to a small house on the edge of town. The yard was overgrown, the paint on the siding fading. Through the window, I saw him helping his father into a chair, adjusting a blanket around his mother's shoulders. His expression wasn't the hardened one I knew from work. It was gentle, almost breaking. When he came back out and saw me waiting, he didn't look angry. He just looked tired. After his father's funeral, Marcus was quieter than I'd ever seen him. The man who once commanded rooms with sharp words and unshakable authority now moved through the halls of the hospital like a shadow, efficient but subdued, his eyes carrying a weight that no one else seemed to notice. But I noticed. Every time. He never asked for help, never let the cracks show when we were surrounded by colleagues. But at night, when the unit slowed and the world finally gave us space, I'd see it. The tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. The way his jaw clenched too tightly when someone mentioned family. The exhaustion that made his steps drag just a little slower. I wanted to fix it. But grief isn't something you can fix. It's something you stand beside, steady and silent, until the person carrying it can breathe again. So I stayed. I leaned against him when he needed to collapse. I held him when he couldn't hold himself, and when the fire between us threatened to dim under the weight of his sorrow, I reminded him that I wasn't going anywhere. One night, weeks later, we were sitting in his car after a shift, the silence between us heavier than usual. He hadn't said a word on the drive, just stared out the windshield like the world beyond it was something he couldn't quite reach. Finally, he exhaled. A sound almost like a surrender. "My mother's getting worse," he said, voice rough. "She asks for him every night." I don't know how much longer I can do this. I reached over, taking his hand. "You don't have to do it alone." His eyes flicked to mine, searching. "Why are you still here? You could have walked away from this. God knows I've given you enough reasons to." I didn't hesitate. Because when I look at you, I don't just see the doctor, or the son, or the man who's breaking. I see someone worth fighting for. For the first time in weeks, his grip on my hand tightened. And in that moment, I realized that love isn't about timing or perfection. It's about showing up when it's hardest, staying when it would be easier to leave. The following days blurred with more long shifts and more difficult nights. His mother's decline became sharper, her confusion more frequent. Marcus spent every spare moment at her side, his exhaustion pulling him thinner by the day. But he let me in. He let me help. Together, we cooked small meals she would barely eat. We sat by her bedside when she couldn't sleep, And sometimes, in the quiet moments between her fading breaths, he'd hold my hand so tightly it hurt. And then, one night, it happened. I had just finished a brutal double shift when he called. His voice was steady, but I could hear it in the silence between his words. This was it. His mother was slipping. I drove to his house, still in my scrubs, my shoes carrying the dust and blood of the day. When I walked in, he didn't speak. He just led me to her bedside. We sat there together, him on one side, me on the other, holding her frail hands as her breaths grew shallower. And when the final one came, when her chest stilled and the silence settled like a blanket over the room, Marcus didn't break alone. He broke with me. I had never seen a man cry like that. Not with shame, not with restraint, but with the raw honesty of someone who had lost everything. And I held him, my uniform damp with his grief, my arms aching from the strength it took to keep him from collapsing completely. That night changed us, because after the storm of grief, after the unbearable silence, there was nothing left to hide. He had lost the last pieces of the family he had carried for so long, but he still had me, and I knew without a doubt that I would stay no matter how heavy the weight became. Back at the hospital, things shifted too. He softened, not with everyone, but with me. The sharpness of his words dulled. The fire in his eyes was no longer only the blaze of control, but something warmer, steadier. Our stolen moments became less about desperate escape and more about survival, about two people learning to breathe together after drowning separately. We still fought. We still clashed over patient care. We still burned with the kind of heat that could set fire to everything around us. But underneath it now was something unshakable. A bond forged not just in passion, but in pain, loss, and the decision to hold on to each other when everything else fell away.